It is a Christmas Eve edition of Locked On Grizzlies. One more sleep to Christmas Day. And I have an early Christmas gift for you, Grizzlies fans. Shawn Coleman, former host of Locked On Grizzlies, rejoining the show. Happy to talk with him about Grizzlies basketball. A tough loss to the Clippers that might wind up being a gift in the long run. How Jake LaRavia is a problem. And we're going to end the show with a wish for Memphis in the coming year. All that and more on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
After all, there's only one more sleep till Christmas. Yes, I did just start this episode of a basketball podcast singing a Muppet Christmas Carol song, and that's the kind of analysis that you get from Joe Mullinax when DeMichael Cole leaves him alone to host an episode of Locked On Grizzlies. But I'm not alone, and I'll remind you of that wonderful fact here momentarily. Thank you so much for being with me. If you haven't turned off the show already on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies, I am one of your hosts, Joe Mullinax, and I'll introduce my guest once again here in a moment. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by the good folks over at FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We are free and available as proud members of Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing. Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, literally anywhere you get a podcast, you can check out DeMichael Cole, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal, and myself, Joe Mullinax, each and every time that an episode drops. You can also check out my written words over at our Locked On Daily newsletter, free daily newsletter covering the Memphis Grizzlies. Go to lockedondaily.com. Check out that newsletter. It is free. It gets sent to your inbox each and every time that a newsletter drops. We're going to be taking the next couple of days off. I don't know if you know this or not, but a pretty major holiday is coming up. I do have a wife and children. I'd rather they not leave me on the holidays. So I will be taking a couple of days from the newsletter at least, but it will be back on Friday after today's newsletter. So make sure you are hitting up the free daily newsletter. LockedOnDaily.com is where you can find that info. I mentioned that I have a special guest host on this edition of the podcast. He is Shawn Coleman, former host of Locked On Grizzlies, has done a phenomenal job. Every once in a while, we still get folks calling for Shawn, usually when I piss off the audience in some way, shape, or form. But Shawn Coleman and I go back a long ways, back to the SB Nation, Grizzly Bear Blues days. And there's few people that I respect more in this line of work than Shawn Coleman. Few people I'd rather be talking Memphis Grizzlies basketball with. Obviously, I love DeMichael Cole, but Shawn, it's great to have you as a fill-in on this episode. How are you, sir?
Doing well. And hearing your beautiful singing voice just a second ago reminded me that I just watched Frozen 2, and it's my yearly reminder to you, Joe Mullinax, that Into the Unknown will forever and always be a better song than Show Yourself. So, yeah.
I mean, we're just going to have to agree to disagree on that one, old friend. But Into the Unknown is a banger. I'm not disputing that. We can both agree that Frozen 2 is a superior soundtrack to Frozen 1.
Not movie, but
not movie, soundtrack specifically.
Soundtrack, I'll give you that. So yeah.
And you'll have to forgive Shawn and I. We're fathers to young children, so that's how we're experts on these things.
Yes.
I'm not going to apologize for the Muppet Christmas Carol. I totally would still watch that even if I didn't have kids. But
I would have sung "Believe" by Josh Groban, best Christmas song ever.
But hey, go. That's also a good one. That's also a good one. I've been told I'm the Josh Groban of my generation. If Josh Groban were a fat, out of shape man. But assuming people are still listening to and watching this podcast, let's jump in talking Grizzlies basketball. A tough loss for Memphis on Monday night, obviously heading into the Christmas holiday, 114-110 to the Los Angeles Clippers. But Shawn, I have here in our lead on today's show, it's a gift. And I truly do believe that because that is a situation for Memphis. They haven't had many games like that, competitive games against good basketball teams. You could easily argue Ty Lue, he's not going to win it because, you know, the Cleveland Cavaliers and Oklahoma City Thunder exist and the Memphis Grizzlies to a lesser extent. Ty Lue is doing one of the best coaching jobs in the NBA this season. No Kawhi Leonard. Lots of folks wrote off the Clippers. You most certainly should not be writing off the Clippers. That is a good, tough basketball team. Maybe not an NBA title contender, but they're going to make noise in the Western Conference as long as they're able to keep guys like Norman Powell, James Harden. You know, Zubac had a phenomenal game against Memphis. The Clippers beat the Grizzlies fair and square in my mind. I thought it was a good competitive game, but Memphis lost because they were outplayed and outcoached. That can be a blessing in the long run if the Grizzlies allow it to be. Do you agree with that, sir?
Yeah, no, I definitely think that's the case, and I'm gonna kind of pair, I'm gonna lump our two last losses to both LA teams together because I think that they clearly show some things that need to be worked on, and they need to be worked on now with the schedule that the Grizzlies have coming up. The first thing that stands out to me in tonight's loss, the Grizzlies were 22 of 58 from inside the arc. Overall, against the Lakers and the Clippers, they shot less than 42% from two. That was the same thing that hurt us in the playoff series a few years back against the Lakers. The Grizzlies are going to have to, they're consistently thought of as one of the best, if not the best, team shooting inside the arc. It's got to show up, obviously, against playoff caliber teams. The other thing that stands out is Ja Morant struggled a bit. 13 of 42 in these two games. And I don't think that's a big concern. He's Ja Morant. He'll figure it out. But you've got to have him, being able to score efficiently to really be the catalyst of this offense. And then the other thing that stands out to me, Joe, that may be the biggest Achilles heel. I know we want to look at this as a gift, and I think that it needs to be something that the Grizzlies are going to have to make adjustments on, and it starts with Zach Edey as well as Jaren Jackson Jr. It's the bigs, Anthony Davis and Zubac. Those were the two best players. AD in the game versus the Lakers, Zubac tonight against the Clippers. And you think when we play 11 straight games against 9 of the top 10 or top 12 teams in the West starting in January, Wemby, Derek Lively, we're not going to have to worry about Jokic or AD, but we're going to have to consistently match up against Sabonis. We're going to have to consistently match up against some of the NBA's best bigs, best rebounders. That's going to be a tough matchup if we've seen these last two games. So those are some things that stand out not only for the Grizzlies to make adjustments with now, but it's a gift because if we can make those adjustments, it can help us out in this stretch in the near future, but also for the playoffs.
I think that Ja Morant struggles, I've talked about those a little bit in a smart aleck way, right? We don't talk about Ja Morant coming off the bench because Scottie Pippen Jr. has outplayed him recently. So I don't know why we ever did that with Desmond Bane. But I'm gonna latch on to your Zach Edey comment because I think you're right on. But I also think it's a good example of this idea of this game being a gift. Because I know you watched the game. I watched it too, of course. Zach Edey evolved literally in game. Like Zubac dominated him, especially in the first half. He dominated every Grizzlies big, right? He was the best big man on the floor, including Jaren Jackson Jr. Jaren had nothing for Zubac, nothing at all. Jaren couldn't handle it. Edey got better as the game went on. Edey had several blocks in this game. Edey did not have the offensive game that you would be used to seeing from a guy that's a back-to-back National Player of the Year in college, but he rebounded. He set screens. He did exactly the things that Memphis is looking for him to do. He still impacted the game. I think that one performance, and we'll talk more about another one here in a moment, that one performance from Edey is one of the reasons I see this as a gift. Because you have to remember, these Grizzlies, as they are currently constructed, have not played enough meaningful basketball games. They just haven't. Scottie Pippen Jr. has not. Jaren, Ja, and Dez have not played meaningful basketball in a long time. Right? This is a really important watershed moment if the Grizzlies let it be, because again, there's no denying that there's things that need to be fixed. The turnovers are a problem. I understand pace, and there's just going to be more turnovers because there's more possessions, but the Clippers took advantage of those turnovers. That has to be something they take a look at. Getting dominated in the paint. DeMichael Cole talks about it all the time on this show. The Grizzlies prioritize that. When the Grizzlies lose in the paint, that is something to note. But if you take that loss and apply it as a lesson, it is something that a clearly talented team can grow from, as opposed to, I guess we're just not good enough. That's not the vibe I get from this game.
Absolutely not. And the other thing about it is that when we talk about it, you talk about Edey evolving in game. Well, we're talking about a two-time back-to-back National Player of the Year. And I don't ever think that Edey's going to get to that level in the NBA. But one thing that I don't think is talked about enough is the mentality of Zach Edey. You've got a lot of these guys who are 7'3" to 7'5" that come to the NBA who a lot of times forget that they're that big. Zach Edey plays like someone who wants to make sure that his opponents remember he is that big. And so when he's got that mentality about him, he's the type of guy who, when you see what he did in college, he applies that same mentality. Part of that mentality mentality aspect is making quick adjustments, evolving. So one of the things that we talk about when it comes to a game like this where he struggled, but you're right, he did show improvements. As we go through this gauntlet stretch going into the new year, this could be the type of thing that really helps Zach Edey take his game to the next level. When I talk about our inside scoring plus limiting these big centers, both those things directly go back to Edey. So if he makes adjustments and he starts being successful through this stretch, this is what can make him a reliable contributor in playoff basketball, which we certainly will need from time to time, especially depending on matchup if we match up against one of these bigger centers in the playoffs.
Let Shawn and I know in the comments. Hit us up on X at StatsSAC for Shawn, at Joe Mullinax for me. Let us know what you're thinking. Hit us up. Again, really a frustrating game. If you want to be mad in the comments, by all means, call me an idiot. A lot of you guys like to do that anyway. The list is long but distinguished of people that follow the Memphis Grizzlies that think I'm a moron. But I do think there's possibilities for positivity here, and it sounds like Shawn agrees. Doesn't mean there aren't things that need to be fixed, but it's coming into clearer vision what those things are as the season grinds forth. Another thing that's coming into more clear vision is that Jake LaRavia can ball, and that Jake LaRavia is a problem. But unfortunately, that has multiple meanings for the Memphis Grizzlies, and we're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Stick around. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Robinhood Gold. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.25% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on IRA account contributions. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. Make sure you're checking out Robinhood Gold today. All right, Shawn. So you and I and our old friend Parker Fleming, right? The GBB, three best buddies anyone could have. Shout out to Brandon Abraham, who I don't know if we're allowed to mention. He used to be in GBB. He's higher up in the Grizzlies organization than I ever will be. But the GBB standard bearers from back in the day, we have a group chat, and Jake LaRavia often gets talked about. You know, our old friend Parker Fleming at Paca_Flocka on X has a Substack that talked about LaRavia's impact recently. I know you've talked about it a lot. LaRavia is hooping, right? And he's a guy who took advantage of a competitive game and was able to show that he is a rotation piece, right? Like, we love Luke Kennard. No one beats the Luke Kennard drum more than me. It pains me to say Luke Kennard played 16 minutes against the Los Angeles Clippers, did not shoot a single shot, had one rebound, one turnover, was a -4. He got a lot of cardio in. Luke Kennard's probably not long for this Grizzlies life, and that's just the reality at this stage. Unfortunately, that also might be true for Jake LaRavia, but for very different reasons. Here's a guy that Memphis can't necessarily bring back after the contract situation for this past summer, not picking up that team option, but because of the limitations of that, he may not make a ton of sense to be tradable as an asset either. You're kind of an expert in Grizzlies circles on this kind of stuff. Explain to our listeners, again, Jake LaRavia is a problem because he's probably a good rotation player on a good team. That's a good problem. The bad problem is Memphis may not have him for long, and they may not be able to get additional assets out of it because of the choice they made this past summer.
Yeah, and I'm going to give, again, Parker credit for this because, that I've talked with Parker about this, about, Jake LaRavia. What do the Grizzlies potentially have in place for him? And the thing that stands out to me that makes Jake LaRavia so impressive to watch is, we used to talk about John Conchar, and I know that's a very polarizing name when it comes to those who follow the Grizzlies. But if you're talking about a 6'8" version of John Conchar who is consistently hitting 40% of his threes while also consistently being able to add value outside of scoring. Jake doesn't need but 5 or 7 shots a game, if that, to still add value. That is a very valuable player, especially for a team like the Grizzlies, who have so many of their shots already accounted for when it comes to Ja, Jaren, and Bane. But LaRavia has really stepped up his overall ability to impact the game in multiple ways outside of scoring. That is what has made him so valuable. We also talk about the Grizzlies having just this impressive depth, Joe, and they've got plenty of guys who are absolutely awesome when it comes to them playing against other bench units and things like that. But how many of those guys actually elevate our best players? If you look at the net rating of Ja, Jaren, and Bane on the court with Jake versus those 3 off the court with Jake, their overall net ratings skyrocket with Jake on the court. That means he is a complementary piece. He plays well with those pieces. So overall, Jake LaRavia is not only, in my opinion, a rotation player now, but also he potentially could, have a 10 to 15 minute role in the playoffs. But when it comes to how much value he adds on the court, he's going to need to stay with the Grizzlies to offer the most value, I feel, because since they declined his club option, Jake LaRavia cannot be offered more than 1 year and just north of $5 million this next offseason by the Grizzlies. That's what happens when a team declines one of the rookie option contract years on a rookie's 4-year opening contract. But if they trade him, I know some people look at it, and I look at it as well. He's a small expiring contract. Could they trade him in the right deal? Well, if they were to trade him, and this is straight from Parker, I believe that the team that acquires him has the same limitation. So he really doesn't have a lot of trade value either. What we're getting at is that since LaRavia elevates the overall play of our best players, and he doesn't need the ball that much to be able to do it, I think that Jake's ultimate value is consistently going to be as a rotation member. Now, when we get Vince back, when we get Gigi back, I think both those players have higher ceilings than Jake. Obviously, likely longer-term futures. Maybe that changes. But Jake has done everything that he needs to do and that the Grizzlies need him to do to consistently offer value, and he does it in a way that elevates the play of our best players. That's something that could show up, multiple times in the playoff series. Not guaranteeing that, but I don't think it's a far-fetched idea to talk about Jake being in that playoff rotation.
If you're going to talk about Jake LaRavia trades, it almost has to involve Eastern Conference contenders, which is really rare, right? Or maybe not really rare, but it is an interesting thing to say because you're not trying to help your opposition in an NBA Finals series, potentially, fingers crossed. You don't really want to help those guys that much, but no other team, you have to view it as an expiring contract. You have to view it as a guy that's not going to be there long-term, because why in the world wouldn't Detroit or Brooklyn, somebody that's going to have the ability to sign that dude, why wouldn't you sign him to a 3-year, $30 million contract based off of what you've seen this season? Would that make sense for the Grizzlies? Not necessarily. And I'm sure that's part of the logic that Kleiman and company, Zach Kleiman, the Grizzlies GM, that's probably part of their thought process, right? Even if you really like Jake LaRavia, you have Vince Williams Jr., you have Gigi Jackson. How realistic is it that this guy's going to be a part of your long-term plan? You have to measure that, right? Or at least take your best educated guess. He's playing really well. He has one of the best defensive leaps in terms of lots of advanced numbers of anybody in the NBA. He's doing a lot of really interesting things with the ball in his hands. He seems to be one of the biggest beneficiaries of this new offensive system. For the Grizzlies' sake, you kind of cross your fingers again, and you hope that it's the benefit for Jake is the system, right? Because obviously Memphis is running a very specific offensive system. If LaRavia is cooking like this, Kleiman has had some missteps, but this could be one of the bigger missteps we've seen so far if this doesn't work out and LaRavia goes somewhere else and contributes. Obviously, in the short term, I agree with you. I think his value is mostly with Memphis, but this is a guy that you could have had for another year on a rookie scale contract. You made the choice to not bring him back.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, I get why the Grizzlies had their reasons. I think it was a mistake, for them not to, pick up that 4th-year option. But again, the Grizzlies probably didn't expect Jake to be where he was. But Jake brings up a really interesting conversation that I think, we may allude to here in a minute, is talking about, what could the Grizzlies do in trades? And when besides talking about like a Cam Johnson and maybe, 2 or 3 other guys who could really make sense, if you don't go get those guys, then you're just really talking about a trade to make a trade. But on that same end, the Grizzlies have a lot of guys who we talk about the potential of what they could do and what we hope they could do in the playoffs. They don't have a track record. Our depth has been so good, but none of these guys really have a track record. So if they don't have a track record, what do you start to trust? Well, you start to trust, in my opinion, two things: those that have consistently done it in good games, and those that have consistently done it to elevate our best players. Jake LaRavia has the best plus minus of any Grizzlies player in games against teams above 500. Santi Aldama has been one of our 5 best players in games against teams over 500. So those guys, I know that they don't have a proven track record. You may think that others on the roster have higher ceilings than them eventually, but for this year, I think those type of players are who you're going to have to trust. And I think overall, more often than not, they've shown positive value instead of negative value. I know that may not necessarily be the best thing for Grizzlies fans to hear, but I do think that in terms of Jake LaRavia this year, his best value is as a potential back end of a playoff rotation, and I think that he could add positive value in that role.
It's fitting that you mentioned Santi Aldama. I think that's the choice that was made, right? I think it's Santi Aldama. Memphis wanted to retain the flexibility to bring Santi back. More positional flexibility, can play the 3, 4, 5 in theory. He can do those things. You probably couldn't keep both LaRavia and Santi long term, but that's probably a topic for another edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Hit up Shawn at StatsSAC. Hit me up at Joe Mullinax. Let us know what you're thinking about the Jake LaRavia conversation. He looked pretty good. He had a really strong stretch where he had, I think it was off of a free throw that was missed, a putback dunk, took a charge on an offensive foul from the Clippers. I think it was Coffee that set a hard screen. Just a really impressive showing from Jake in an important game. You want to see those things in that kind of contest, and hopefully that experience pays dividends down the road. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to close out this Christmas Eve edition of the show talking about Memphis wish lists this Christmas season. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W this time of year. You could bet on a winning team like the Washington Commanders. If you want to bet on a losing team like the Tennessee Titans or the Atlanta Falcons this coming Sunday, by all means, you can place a wager on either of those teams and not enjoy the brilliance that is Jaden Daniels and the Washington Commanders. I'm going to choose to enjoy it with FanDuel and picking Jaden Daniels to score a touchdown or to score multiple touchdowns. You can do that and so much more with FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. We close out today's episode talking about, Christmas wishes, right? We obviously both have children, Shawn, and to be honest with you, not to get too sappy on a Tuesday edition of the podcast, but Christmas is better with kids for me. Right. You get to see it through their eyes and experience that energy. And it brings you back to when you were a kid. It gives you an excuse to become an expert on soundtracks like Frozen and Frozen 2. It's one of the best parts of being a dad or a parent in general. So I have followed this Grizzlies team for a very long time, as have you. And I feel not like a child, obviously, but I do have a sentimental connection to the team. And I do have a genuine Christmas wish for Memphis as they approach this season with their Grizzlies.
Call me at Christmas.
Yeah, that's right. Make sure you call it Christmas. It might even be extended to Martin Luther King Day this year, right? With all the injuries. But for me, it's to enjoy it, right? There's going to be people in the comments that are going to be breaking down how Jaren is soft and he needs to be more aggressive against bigs. And there's going to be folks on X that are going to critique Taylor Jenkins and how he didn't have the rotations right and Ja didn't come in fast enough. People are going to conveniently not point out the thing that you pointed out earlier in the show about Ja being 13 for 42 from the field in the last 2 games against the Los Angeles teams. There's going to be levels to this that people get mad about, mad at me, mad at you, whatever, frustrated. The Grizzlies are one of the better teams in the NBA again. And Chase at Deep Fried Couch, he and I talk about this. We disagree a lot on X. But he and I talk about this every once in a while. Memphis has caught lightning in a bottle twice, right? Like you and I got to experience the grit and grind era and how organically real that was. And that is the most fun I have had covering, following, being a fan of a professional sports team in my entire life. because it was like watching a high school team that genuinely cared about each other, right? Like I could totally see the grit and grind Grizzlies playing a game and then going over to Zach Randolph's mom's house. You know what I'm saying? And going over for dinner or going to, they went to each other's weddings. They were around each other's kids. Like they genuinely cared about one another, and that it was organic. It was real. The Grizzlies, for the second time in my run as a fan, are a really fun team to follow. They're young, they're competitive. It's different than grit and grind, but it's the similar energy of this is something special that we're witnessing. Memphis has gotten it twice. So be frustrated that the team lost. You expect more, and that's totally fine. My wish for Memphis this Christmas season is just step back and enjoy it, man, because you've got fan bases like the Detroit Pistons. You're right. You've got fan bases like the Washington Wizards, the Charlotte Hornets that just haven't had a chance. And again, Detroit, in fairness, won, in the early 2000s. But you have fan bases that haven't had a chance to have what the Grizzlies have had over the last decade. Be mad, be a fan. You want them to win. Just don't take for granted what you have in this team and in this franchise, because lightning has struck twice, and that doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, and the other thing to remember as well, the Grizzlies have put themselves in a really good position. They're 20-10. I think the old Phil Jackson, idea was that if you win 40 games before you get 20 losses, that makes you a true contender. And Grizzlies are right in line with that. The thing that I'll add to that before I get to my wish is that this team, in my opinion, does have more potential than the 21-22 or 22-23 team to make a good playoff run or a deep playoff run, for the right reasons. I believe this offense has a higher ceiling. I believe that the overall creativity, the depth of this offense to be able to counter against good offenses or against good defenses, I think it's deeper, and I think a lot of that has to do with the shooting depth. This is the best shooting team we've had in Grizzlies franchise history. So the effective defenses that the two LA teams have played in their last two losses against us, I've got more faith this offense can adjust to that than past offenses. My Christmas wish, Joe, for this Grizzlies team is to make the most of the next month, because it's in a perfect spot when starting on the 29th, in that game against the Thunder, they play 11 straight games against teams who are right now top 12 in the West. You could not ask for a better setup. It's 3 months in front of the playoffs. So you're going to truly get an idea of what's going to work in playoff settings, what's not going to work, which players are going to step up to truly add value outside of your big three, which players may struggle, where you need to potentially go out and make a trade to fulfill a weakness of the team, where potentially will you be okay, how will Vince and Gigi add value when they get back. And then you've got 3 months after this gauntlet to be able to make those adjustments, install them, find success with them, and it really sets you well for the playoffs. Besides health, I think that to me is the Christmas wish. Not only being able to make the most of this gauntlet coming up over the next, month, but also showing consistent improvement as well. Edie improving, others stepping up. Can the shooting maintain its success? Can we win on the road, since a lot of these games being on the road? My Christmas wish is the Grizzlies really using this next month to assess where they are, make the necessary adjustments, and become in an even better position to have playoff success this year.
You nailed it, Shawn. That's exactly right. And that Sunday game, that's a late Christmas present, right? Going up against the Oklahoma City Thunder. We've wanted this for a while, or at least I'll speak for myself. I've wanted this for a while, and I know DeMichael Cole has wanted it too. The Thunder are the new kid on the block. They do the post-game interviews, the cute things that Memphis did 2 years ago, everybody celebrating and hugging. The Thunder are the youngest team in the NBA. They deserve all the shine that they get. On yesterday's episode, I talked about how the Thunder should be playing on Christmas Day. It's ridiculous they're not. The Grizzlies haven't had a chance to test themselves against this Oklahoma City Thunder team with their roster healthy, or at least their big three healthy, the way that they currently are, right? So that's going to be a wonderful test, and that test expands and extends. And you're exactly right. The timing is perfect. If they need a trade, they will know that by the end of the next the next 12 or so games. That'll be very clear for them. So I think that's a wonderful one. And I think the wish that both of us can agree on, Shawn, is health, right? Marcus Smart with another finger issue, Gigi Jackson hopefully coming back in the next couple of weeks, Vince Williams Jr. a couple weeks behind him more than likely. Hopefully in this stretch, we get to see what this team actually is. You mentioned my call me a Christmas phrase that I usually use. I can't say that this year because we have no idea who this team is, but it's also becoming increasingly likely, Shawn, we're never going to know before a trade decision has to be made.
But the other thing that I'll say is this, is that luckily right now we are seeing our big three play together. I think that is huge. When we talk about the fact that, I think that, they just a few weeks ago, they had only played 100 games together in their career, I think, if I remember correctly from what I had added up. But the point that I'm getting at is that right now, the most important players who are going to ultimately determine where we go, they are playing together. We're seeing Desmond Bane step up his game. We're seeing Ja, who, in my opinion, has looked the best that he has as an offensive engine this year at times with his passing, but the scoring, he's run into a little bit of a struggle. It happens. That happens when you play against good coaches, but you have full faith Ja's going to bounce back, and he will. But the point, and Jaren, obviously, having the best season he's had, you put all those together and you have them be able to intertwine their skills to feed off each other. That's another big thing that can come out of this, next 3 weeks or so, is how well they can continue to adapt. Will they continue to have the really good net ratings and positive impact, learn how to play off each other? Them being able to play together and them being healthy through this stretch, I think may be the best asset of all. But them getting the most playing time, even if others are experiencing injuries, I think that could really show up and be valuable in the playoffs in a few months.
Shawn Coleman, you are one of the very best to talk Memphis Grizzlies basketball with. It bothers me that you don't get a chance to talk about the Memphis Grizzlies more, but that is definitely not a subject for a public podcast. I can't wait to do this again. I hope we can have you back on again in 2025. DeMichael and I have both kind of talked about, we'll still do our solo shows and keep working through that, but having guest hosts when DeMichael is gone or I'm gone is going to be something we prioritize to get more faces and new perspectives on the Grizzlies out there. Shawn's perspective, not necessarily new, an old friend of Locked On Grizzlies, to get us started on that. Thank you so much, Shawn. Happy holidays to you and yours, and we'll do it again soon.
Happy holidays to you, Joe, and your family. Happy holidays as well to DeMichael, who is absolutely wonderful. And happy holidays to everybody listening in. It was a pleasure. Would love to come back anytime. And Happy New Year to everyone as well. Go Grizzlies.
Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. Make sure you are making DeMichael, myself, Shawn, whoever is on the podcast, a part of your everyday Memphis Grizzlies and NBA content consumption. Make sure you're checking out our free daily newsletter, lockedondaily.com. Check out my written words on the Grizzlies almost every day. The next couple of days, the newsletter will be taking off after today for the holiday, and there will be no Christmas Day edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Sorry, NBA, you don't get Joe Mullinax and DeMichael Cole if the Grizzlies aren't on Christmas Day. That's not how this works. You want my beautiful mug and my sultry baritone, you put the Grizzlies back on Christmas Day, and I will be back out there podcasting it up. But since they're not, there will be an episode on the 26th. DeMichael and I will be taking off Christmas.
Yeah.
Hopefully, Shawn's fired up too. Hopefully, you're going to have a wonderful holiday with your families. Enjoy the time with friends. Get some rest, and we'll see you back here on our 26th edition of the show. We'll be off on the 25th. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you again to Shawn Coleman at StatsSAC. Make sure you're following him on X. Make sure you're following me. Follow DeMichael, and follow Locked On Grizzlies. Merry Christmas, everyone. See you soon.